Hare Krishna, everybody. Welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books. And boy, did I miss you yesterday. I have to confess, I'm addicted. I cannot live without reading Caitanya-caritämrta to you, but somehow or other we survived for a day, and now we're back. Caitanya-caritämrta, I will just go right into it because I can't wait any longer. The separation is killing me. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu felt very strongly, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur felt very strongly about the Caitanya-caritämrta. He made this statement: in due course, Mahapralaya, devastating floods, will inundate the entire universe. If you attempt to survive by swimming in that deluge, then do not neglect to take hold of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Or, if you cannot hold all three, then release Bhagavad Gita. If necessary, you may also relinquish Srimad Bhagavatam. But under no circumstances release your hold on Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. For if this one book remains, then the flood can do no actual damage, because after it has subsided, the message of Shastra can be revived from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita alone, it being the essence of all Shastra. Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhaktavinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhaktavinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktavinda. Okay, we reached the 16th chapter of the Ädi-lilä. In case you didn't remember, there are only 17 chapters in the Ädi-lilä. So we almost finished with the Ädi-lilä. My, how time flies when you're having a good time. So we've reached the Kaishora period of Lord Chaitanya's life in Navadvip. And we're starting at text 27. Offering my obeisances to Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur, I shall try to describe that portion of the Lord's analysis which, when he heard it, made the Digvijay feel himself condemned. Text 28. Once on a full moon night, the Lord was sitting on the bank of the Ganges with his many disciples and discussing literary topics. Text 29. Coincidentally, Keshava Kashmiri, Pandit, came there. While offering his prayers to Mother Ganges, he met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Text 30. The Lord received him with adoration, but because Keshava Kashmiri was very proud, he talked to the Lord very inconsiderately. Text 31. I understand that you are a teacher of grammar, he said, and that your name is Nimai Pandit. People speak very highly of your teaching of beginners' grammar. Oops. Purport. Formerly, Sanskrit schools first taught grammar very thoroughly, and this system continues even now. A student was supposed to study grammar carefully for 12 years in the beginning of his life, because if one is expert in the grammar of the Sanskrit language, all the Shastras are open to him. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was famous for teaching grammar to students, and therefore Caitanya-caritämrta first referred to his position as a teacher of grammar. Caitanya-caritämrta was very proud of his literary career. He was far above the first lessons of grammar, and so he thought the position of Nimai Pandit not at all comparable to his own. Text 32. I understand that you teach Kalapa Vyakarana. I have heard that your students are very expert in the word jugglery of this grammar. Purport. There are many schools of grammar in the Sanskrit language, the most famous of which are the systems of Panini and the Kalapa and Kaumudi grammars. There were different branches of grammatical knowledge, and a student of grammar was supposed to study them all in 12 years. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was famous as Nimai Pandit, taught grammar to his students who became expert in dealing with the word jugglery of complicated grammar. Almost anyone expert in studying grammar interprets the Shastras in many ways by changing the root meanings of their words. A student of grammar can sometimes completely change the meaning of a sentence by juggling grammatical rules. Caitanya-caritämrta indirectly taunted Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by implying that although he was a great teacher of grammar, such grammatical jugglery of root meanings did not require great expertise. This was a challenge to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because it was prearranged that Caitanya-caritämrta would have to discuss the Shastras with Nimai Pandit, from the very beginning he wanted to bluff the Lord. Thus the Lord replied as follows. Text 33. The Lord said, "Yes, I am known as a teacher of grammar, but factually, I cannot impress my students with grammatical knowledge, nor can they understand me very well." Purport. Since Caitanya-caritämrta was a little puffed up, the Lord increased his artificial pride by presenting himself as subordinate to him. Thus the Lord flattered him as follows. Text 34. My dear sir, whereas you are a very learned scholar in all sorts of scriptures and are very much experienced in composing poetry, I am only a boy, a new student, and nothing more. Text 35. Therefore, I desire to hear your skill in composing poetry. We could hear this if you would mercifully describe the glory of Mother Ganges. Text 36. When the Brahmana Caitanya-caritämrta heard this, he became still more puffed up, and within 1 hour he composed 100 verses describing Mother Ganges. Text 37. The Lord praised him, saying, "Sir, there is no greater poet than you in the entire world." Text 38. Your poetry is so difficult that no one can understand it but you and Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning. Purport. Replying to Caitanya-caritämrta sarcastically, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu indirectly minimized the value of his poetry by saying, "Yes, your compositions are so nice that no one but you and your worshipable mother, the goddess of learning, can understand them." Caitanya-caritämrta was a favorite devotee of Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as the master of the goddess of learning, has the right to speak sarcastically of her devotees. In other words, although Keshava Kashmiri was proud of being favored by the goddess of learning, he did not know that she is controlled by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, because he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 39. But if you explain the meaning of one verse, we can all hear it from your own mouth, and thus be very happy. Text 40. The Digvijay Keshava Kashmiri inquired which verse he wanted explained. The Lord then recited one of the 100 verses Keshava Kashmiri had composed. Here is the verse. The greatness of Mother Ganges always brilliantly exists. She is the most fortunate because she emanated from the lotus feet of Sri Vishnu, the personality of Godhead. She is a second goddess of fortune, and therefore she is always worshipped, both by demigods and by humanity. Endowed with all wonderful qualities, she flourishes on the head of Lord Shiva. Text 42. When Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked him to explain the meaning of this verse, the champion, very much astonished, inquired from him as follows. I recited all the verses like the blowing wind. How could you completely learn by heart even one among those verses? Oops. Text 44. The Lord replied, by the grace of the Lord, someone may be a great poet, and similarly, by his grace, someone else may become a great Shrutidara, who can memorize anything immediately. Purport. In this connection, Shrutidara is a very important word. Shruti means hearing, and Dara means one who can capture. Formerly, before the beginning of Kali Yuga, almost everyone, especially among the intelligent men, the Brahmanas, was a Shrutidara. As soon as a student heard any of the Vedic wisdom from his master, he would remember it forever. There was no need to refer to books, and therefore there were no written books in those days. The spiritual master delivered the Vedic hymns and their explanations to the student, who would then remember them forever without consulting books. To become a Shrutidara, one who can remember simply by hearing, it is a great achievement for a student. In the Bhagavad Gita 10:41, the Lord says, Yad yad vibhutimat sattvam srimad orjitam evava tadeva vagaccha tvam mamate jong shasambhavam. Know that all opulent, beautiful, and glorious creations spring from but a spark of my splendor. As soon as we find anything extraordinary, we should understand that such an extraordinary manifestation is the special grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied to the champion, Keshava Kashmiri, that just as he was greatly proud of being a favorite devotee of Mother Saraswati, so someone else, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, being favored by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, could become a Shrutidara and thus memorize anything immediately simply by hearing it. Text 45. Satisfied by the statement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Brahmana Keshava Kashmiri explained the quoted verse. Then the Lord said, now kindly explain the special qualities and faults in the verse. Purport. Not only did Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu pick out this one among the 100 verses and remember it, although the Brahmana had recited them like the blowing wind, but he also analyzed its qualities and faults. Not only did he hear the verse, but he immediately made a critical study of it. Text 46. The Brahmana replied, "There is not a tinge of fault in that verse. Rather, it has the good qualities of similes and alliteration." Purport. In the last line of the verse quoted by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the letter Ba is repeated many times, as in the words Bhavani, Bhartur, Bibhaviti, and Adbhuta. Such repetition is called anuprasa, or alliteration. The words Lakshmir Eva and Vishnu's Charana Kamalotpati are instances of upama alankara, for they exhibit metaphorical beauty. The Ganges is water, and Lakshmi is the goddess of fortune. Since water and a person are not actually similar, the comparison is metaphorical. Text 47. The Lord said, "My dear sir, I may say something to you if you will not become angry. Can you explain the faults in this verse?" Text 48. There is no doubt that your poetry is full of ingenuity, and certainly it has satisfied the Supreme Lord. Yet if we scrutinizingly consider it, we can find both good qualities and faults. 49. The Lord concluded, "Now, therefore, let us carefully scrutinize this verse." The poet replied, "Yes, the verse you have recited is perfectly correct." Text 50. You are an ordinary student of grammar. What do you know about literary embellishments? You cannot review this poetry because you do not know anything about it. Oops. Purport. Keshava Kashmiri first wanted to bluff Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by saying that since he was not an advanced student in literary style, he could not review a verse full of metaphors and literary ornaments. This argument has some basis in fact. Unless one is a medical man, he cannot criticize a medical man, and unless one is a lawyer, he cannot criticize a lawyer. Therefore, Keshava Kashmiri first depreciated the Lord's position. Because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was to the champion a student of grammar, how could he dare criticize a great poet like him? Lord Chaitanya therefore criticized the poet in a different way. He said that although he was certainly not advanced in a literary career, he had heard from others how to criticize such poetry, and as a Shrutidara, possessing a complete memory, he could understand the process for such a review. Text 51. Taking a humble position, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Because I am not on your level, I have asked you to teach me by explaining the faults and good qualities of your poetry." Text 52. Certainly, I have not studied the art of literary embellishments, but I have heard about it from higher circles, and thus I can review this verse and find in it many faults and many good qualities. Purport. The statement Caitanya-caritämrta, I have heard it, is very important in the sense that hearing is more important than directly studying or perceiving. If one is expert in hearing and hears from the right source, his knowledge is immediately perfect. This process is called Shrotapanta, or the acquisition of knowledge by hearing from authorities. All Vedic knowledge is based on the principle that one must approach a bona fide spiritual master and hear from him the authoritative statements of the Vedas. It is not necessary for one to be a highly polished literary man to receive knowledge. To receive perfect knowledge from a perfect person, one must be expert in hearing. This is called the descending process of deductive knowledge, or avaroha panta. 53. The poet said, "All right, let me see what good qualities and faults you have found." The Lord replied, "Let me speak, and please hear me without becoming angry." Text 54. My dear sir, in this verse, there are 5 faults and 5 literary ornaments. I shall state them one after another. Kindly hear me, and then give your judgment. Purport. In the verse beginning with Mahatman Gangaya, there are 5 literary ornaments and 5 examples of faulty composition. There are 2 examples of the fault called avimrishta, videyangsha, and 1 example each of the faults virudamati, punarukti, and bhagnakrama. Vimrishta means clean, and videyangsha means predicate. It is a general rule of composition to establish a subject first and then give its predicate. For example, according to Sanskrit grammar, if one says, "This man is learned," his composition is in order. But if one says, "Learned in this man is this man," the composition is not in order. Such a flaw is called avrimrishta videyangsha dosha, or the fault of unclean composition. The subject matter to be known of the verse is the glorification of the Ganges, and therefore the word idam, this, or what is known, should have been placed before instead of after the glorification. The subject matter already known should be placed before the unknown, so that its meaning will not be misconstrued. The second instance of avinkrishta videyangsha dosha occurs in the words Dvitiya Sri Lakshmi-riva. In this composition, the word Dvitiya, second, is videya, or unknown. Placing the unknown first to make the compound word Dvitiya Sri Lakshmir is another fault. The words Dvitiya Sri Lakshmi-riva were intended to compare the Ganges to the goddess of fortune, but because of this fault, the meaning of the compound word was bewildering. The third fault is that of virudamati, or contradictory conception. In the words Bhavani, Bhartu, the word Bhavani refers to the wife of Bhava, Lord Shiva. But since Bhavani is already known as the wife of Lord Shiva, to add the word Bharta, husband, thus forming a compound meaning, the husband of the wife of Lord Shiva, is contradictory, for thus it appears as if the wife of Lord Shiva had another husband. The fourth fault is punar ukti, or redundancy, which occurs when the verb vibhati, vibhavati, flourishes, which should have ended the composition, is further qualified by the unnecessary adjective adbhuta guna, endowed with wonderful qualities. The fifth fault is bhagnakrama, which means broken order. In the first, third, and fourth lines, there is anuprasa, or alliteration, created by the sounds ta, ra, and ba. But in the second line, there is no such anuprasa, and therefore the order is broken. 55. In this verse, the fault of avimrishta videyangsha occurs twice, and the faults of virudamati, bhagnakrama, and punarata occur once each. 56. The glorification of the Ganges, Mahatmam Gangaya, is the principal unknown subject matter of this verse, and the known subject matter is indicated by the word idam, which has been placed after the unknown. Text 57. Because you have placed the known subject at the end and that which is unknown in the beginning, the composition is faulty, and the meaning of the words has become doubtful. Text 58. Without first mentioning what is known, one should not introduce the unknown, for that which has no solid basis can never be established anywhere. Purport. This is a verse from the Ekadashi Tattva. Text 59. In the word Dvitiya, Sri Lakshmi, a second all-opulent goddess of fortune, the quality of being a second Lakshmi is the unknown. In making this compound word, the meaning became secondary, and the originally intended meaning was lost. Text 60. Because the word Dvitiya, second, is the unknown, in its composition in this compound word, the intended meaning of equality with Lakshmi is lost. Text 61. Not only is there the fault of Inrishta Vidayangsha, but there is also another fault, which I shall point out to you. Kindly hear me with great attention. 62. There is another great fault. You have arranged the word Bhavani Bhartri to your great satisfaction, but this betrays the fault of contradiction. 63. The word Bhavani means the wife of Lord Shiva, but when we mention her husband, one might conclude that she has another husband. Text 64. It is contradictory to hear that Lord Shiva's wife has another husband. The use of such words in literature creates the fault called Viruddha Mati Krit. Text 65. If someone says, place this charity in the hand of the husband of the wife of the Brahmana, then when we hear these contradictory words, we immediately understand that the Brahmana's wife has another husband. Text 66. The statement by the word vibhavati, flourishes, is complete. Qualifying it with the adjective adbhuta guna, wonderful qualities, creates the fault of redundancy. Text 67. There is extraordinary alliteration in 3 lines of the verse, but in 1 line there is no alliteration. This is the fault of deviation. Text 68. Although there are 5 literary ornaments decorating this verse, the entire verse has been spoiled by these 5 most faulty presentations. Text 69. If there are 10 literary ornaments in a verse, but even 1 faulty expression, the entire verse is nullified. Text 70. One's beautiful body may be decorated with jewels, but 1 spot of white leprosy makes the entire body abominable. Purport. The great sage Bharata Muni, an authority on poetic metaphor, has given his opinion in this connection as follows. As one's body, although well decorated with ornaments, is made unfortunate by even 1 spot of white leprosy, so an entire poem is made useless by a fault, despite alliteration, similes, and metaphors. Text 72. Now hear the description of the 5 literary embellishments. There are 2 ornaments of sound and 3 ornaments of meaning. There is a sound ornament of alliteration in 3 lines, and in the combination of the words Shri and Lakshmi, there is the ornament of a tinge of redundancy. 74. In the arrangement of the first line, the letter ta occurs 5 times, and the arrangement of the third line repeats the letter Ra 5 times. 75. In the fourth line, the letter Ba occurs 4 times. This arrangement of alliteration is a pleasing or ornamental use of sounds. Text 76. Although the words Shri and Lakshmi convey the same meaning and are therefore almost redundant, they are nevertheless not redundant. 77. Describing Lakshmi as possessed of Shri, opulence, offers a difference in meaning with a tinge of repetition. This is the second ornamental use of words. 78. The use of the words Lakshmir Iva, like Lakshmi, manifests the ornament of meaning called Upama, analogy. There is also the further ornament of meaning called Virodhabhasa, or a contradictory indication. 79. Everyone knows that lotus flowers grow in the water of the Ganges, but to say that the Ganges takes birth from a lotus flower seems extremely contradictory. 80. The existence of Mother Ganges begins from the lotus feet of the Lord. Although this statement that water comes from a lotus flower is a contradiction in connection with the Lord Vishnu, it is a great wonder. Text 81. In this birth of the Ganges, by the inconceivable potency of the Lord, there is no contradiction, although it appears contradictory. Purport. The central point of all Vaishnava philosophy is to accept the inconceivable potency of Lord Vishnu. What sometimes appears contradictory from a material point of view, from a material viewpoint, is understandable in connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he can perform contradictory activities by dint of his inconceivable potencies. Modern scientists are puzzled. They cannot even explain how such a large quantity of chemicals has formed the atmosphere. Scientists explain that water is a combination of hydrogen and oxygen, but when asked where such a large quantity of hydrogen and oxygen came from and how they combined to manufacture the great oceans and seas, they cannot answer, because they are atheists who will not accept that everything comes from life. Their thesis is that life comes from matter. Where do all these chemicals come from? The answer is that they are produced by the inconceivable energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Living entities are part of the Supreme Godhead, and from their bodies come many chemicals. For example, the lemon tree is a living entity that produces many lemons, and within each lemon is a great deal of citric acid. Therefore, if even an insignificant living entity who is but a part of the Supreme Lord can produce so much of a chemical, how much potency there must be in the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Scientists cannot perfectly explain where the chemicals of the world are manufactured, but one can explain this perfectly by accepting the inconceivable energy of the Supreme Lord. There is no reason for denying this argument, since there are potencies in the living entities who are samples of the Personality of Godhead. How much potency there must be in the Supreme Godhead Himself. Since there are potencies in the living entities who are samples of the Personality of Godhead, how much potency there must be in the Supreme Personality or the Supreme Godhead Himself. As described in the Vedas, Nityo Nityanam, Chaitanas Chaitananam. He is the chief eternal of all eternals, and the chief living entity among all living entities. Kata Upanishad 2.2.13. Unfortunately, atheistic science will not accept that matter comes from life. Scientists insist upon their most illogical and foolish theory that life comes from matter, although this is quite impossible. They cannot prove in their laboratories that matter can produce life. Yet there are thousands and thousands of examples illustrating that matter comes from life. Therefore, in Sri Caitanya-caritämrta, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says that as soon as one accepts the inconceivable potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, no great philosopher or scientist can put forward any thesis to contradict the Lord's power. This is expressed in the following Sanskrit verse. Everyone knows that lotus flowers grow in the water, but water never grows from a lotus. All such contradictions, however, are wonderfully possible in Krishna. The great river Ganges has grown from his lotus feet. Text 83. The real glory of Mother Ganges is that she has grown from the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu. Such a hypothesis is another ornament called Anumana. Text 84. I have simply discussed the 5 gross faults and 5 literary embellishments of the verse, but if we consider it in fine detail, we will find unlimited faults. Text 85. You have achieved poetic imagination and ingenuity by the grace of your worshipable demigod, but poetry not well reviewed is certainly subject to criticism. Text 86. Poetic skill used with due consideration is very pure, and with metaphors and analogies it is dazzling. Text 87. After hearing the explanation of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the champion poet was struck with wonder. His cleverness stunned. He could not say anything. Speechless. He was speechless. Gobsmacked. Text 88. He wanted to say something, but no reply would come from his mouth. He then began to consider this puzzle within his mind. 89. This mere boy has blocked my intelligence. I can therefore understand that Mother Saraswati has become angry with me. Purport. In the Bhagavad Gita it is clearly said that all intelligence comes from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is situated in everyone's heart as the Paramatma. The Paramatma gave the Pandit the intelligence to understand that because he was proud of his learning and wanted to defeat even the Supreme Lord, by the will of the Lord and through the agency of Mother Saraswati, he had been defeated. One should not, therefore, be too proud of one's position. Even if one is a greatly learned scholar, if he commits an offense to the lotus feet of the Lord, he will not be able to speak properly, in spite of his learning. In every respect, we are controlled. Our only duty, therefore, is to surrender always to the lotus feet of the Lord and not be falsely proud. Mother Saraswati created this situation to favor the champion Pandit so that he might surrender unto Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Text 90. The wonderful explanation the boy has given could not have been possible for a human being. Therefore, Mother Saraswati must have spoken personally through his mouth. Text 91. Thinking thus, the Pandit said, My dear Nimai Pandit, please hear me. Hearing your explanation, I am simply struck with wonder. 92. I am surprised you are not a literary student and you do not have long experience in studying the Shastras. How have you been able to explain all these critical points? 93. Hearing this and understanding the Pandit's heart, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied in a humorous way. 94. My dear sir, I do not know what is good composition and what is bad, but whatever I have spoken must be understood to have been spoken by Mother Saraswati. Text 95. When he heard this judgment from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Pandit sorrowfully wondered why Mother Saraswati wanted to defeat him through a small boy. Text 96. I shall offer prayers and meditation to the Goddess of Learning, the champion concluded, and ask her why she has insulted me so greatly through this boy. Text 97. Saraswati had in fact induced the champion to compose his verse in an impure way. Furthermore, when it was discussed, she covered his intelligence, and thus the Lord's intelligence was triumphant. Text 98. When the poetic champion was thus defeated, all the Lord's disciples sitting there began to laugh loudly, but Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked them not to do so, and he addressed the poet as follows. Text 99. You are the most learned scholar and the topmost of all great poets, for otherwise how could such fine poetry come from your mouth? Text 100. Your poetic skill is like the constant flow of the waters of the Ganges. I find no one in the world who can compete with you. Text 101. Even in the poetic compositions of great poets as Bhavabhuti, Jayadev, and Kalidas, there are many examples of faults. Text 102. Such mistakes should have been considered negligible. One should see only how such poets have displayed their poetic power. Purport. In Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.11 it is said, Tad bhag visargo janataga biplavo yasmin pratishlokam abhadyavatyapi na man anantasya yashon kitani jat shrinvanti gayanti grinanti sadhavaha. In explaining the glories of the Lord, inexperienced men may compose poetry with many faults, but because it contains glorification of the Lord, great personalities read it, hear it, and chant it. Despite its minute literary discrepancies, one must study poetry on the merit of its subject matter. According to Vaishnava philosophy, any literature that glorifies the Lord, whether properly written or not, is first class. There need be no other considerations. The poetic compositions of Bhavabhuti or Srikanta include Malati Madhava, Udara Charita, Vira Charita, and many similar Sanskrit dramas. This great poet was born during the time of Bhojaraj as the son of Nilakanta, a Brahmana. Kalidas flourished during the time of Maharaj Vikramaditya, and he became the state poet. He composed some 30 or 40 Sanskrit dramas, including Kumara Sambhava, Abhigyana, Shakuntala, and Meghaduta. His drama Raghuvangsha is especially famous. We have already described Jayadev in chapter 13 of the Ädi-lilä. Text 103. I am not even fit to be your disciple. Therefore, kindly do not take seriously whatever childish impudence I have shown. Text 104. Please go back home, and tomorrow we may meet again so that I may hear discourses on the Shastras from your mouth. Text 105. In this way, both the poet and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went back to their homes, and at night the poet worshipped Mother Saraswati. Text 106. In a dream, the goddess informed him of the Lord's position, and the poetic champion could understand that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. The next morning, the poet came to Lord Chaitanya and surrendered unto his lotus feet. The Lord bestowed His mercy upon him and cut off all his bondage to material attachment. Purport. The same process advocated by Lord Sri Krishna in His teachings of the Bhagavad Gita as it is, surrender unto me in all instances, was advocated by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The champion surrendered unto the Lord, and the Lord favored him. One who is favored by the Lord is freed from material bondage, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Tyaktva deham punar janma naiti mam eti sorjuna. Text 108. The poetic champion was certainly most fortunate. His life was successful by dint of his vast learning and erudite scholarship, and thus he attained the shelter of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Purport. Srila Narottam Das Thakur has sung that the best qualification for taking shelter of the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya is to be the most fallen, because the Lord came specifically to deliver the fallen souls. In this age, there are very few scholars. Almost everyone is a fallen meat-eater, drunkard, woman hunter, or gambler. Such persons are never considered learned scholars, even if they pose as such. Because these so-called scholars superficially see that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because these so-called scholars superficially see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu associates with fallen souls, they think that he is meant for a lower class of men, but that they do not need him. Such scholars do not take to the Krishna consciousness movement. To be puffed up with false learning, therefore, is a disqualification for accepting the Krishna consciousness movement. But here is a special example, for although the poetic champion was a greatly learned scholar, the Lord also favored him because of his humble submission. Text 109. Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur has described all these incidents elaborately. I have only presented the specific incidents he has not described. The nectarian drops of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes can satisfy the senses of everyone who hears them. Text 111. Shri Rupa Raghunatha Padiyara Ash Caitanya-caritämrta Kahi Krishna Das. Praying at the lotus feet of Sri Rupa and Sri Raghunath, always desiring their mercy, I, Krishna Das, narrate Sri Caitanya-caritämrta following in their footsteps. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to Sri Caitanya-caritämrta, Ädi-lilä, 16th chapter, describing the pastimes of the Lord in his childhood and youth. Jai Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Poganda Kaishora Lila and Yovana Lila of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki Jai, Keshava Kashmiri ki Jai, the Goddess of Learning Saraswati ki Jai, Gaur Premanandi, all the students of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Well, that was quite a lesson in Sanskrit and literature, literary composition. Okay, we'll stop there. It's 8 o'clock. That was almost an hour. If the sages will kindly give us their mercy and give some glorifications or some reflections or some discussion or even questions, whatever, please be my guest.
First one is from Sudevi Dasi.
Hare Krishna, Sudevi Dasi. I hope you're safe over there in Florida. Pretty big hotspot over there.
She says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. I love Wednesdays because just before your reading, Rati Manjari warms me up with her weekly reading of Bhagavad Gita.
Oh, nice.
Hari Hari Bol. And Brian Phillips.
Brian Phillips, Hare Krishna.
He says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, welcome back. I hope that you are rested.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Please accept my humble obeisances.
Thank you.
Glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah, and glories to Prabhupada.
Something from Bhakta Ellis, or Gopal Roy, actually.
Haribol Gopal.
He says, Dear Maharaj, I have a reflection. Hearing the sophistication of Sanskrit grammar makes me think how the language reflects the advancement of the Vedic civilization, and how, for an honest linguist, this should be evidence in itself that we should pay heed to the message contained in the wisdom literature of India.
Absolutely. Very good point. It shows you how Mayaya Paritagyana is powerful in the Kali Yuga, because the material energy is also inconceivable energy. It's Krishna's energy, and it's inconceivably powerful. And therefore, the Mayaya Paritagyana means that one may be very knowledgeable in an ordinary sense in human society, but his knowledge is stolen by illusion, and therefore he cannot attribute it to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the Kashmiri Pandit, Keshava Kashmiri Pandit, was very learned by the grace of Mother Saraswati. But as we heard in the verses, Lord Chaitanya is in control of Saraswati. He's in control of all the demigods. And therefore, she had to, through Lord Chaitanya, or Lord Chaitanya through her rather, had to correct him and humble him. Because without humility, there is no knowledge, as we heard from Krishna himself in Bhagavad Gita. Adambit vamana anambit vam, meaning the first two items of knowledge are humility and pridelessness. So knowledge, as Prabhupada says in the purport, at the end of the purport, he says, knowledge begins with humility. Without humility, you cannot have knowledge. It's just it seems to be knowledge, but it's not real knowledge. Because one will always overstep his, when one's proud, one will always overstep his bounds, or say something over his capacity to know, and therefore he becomes embarrassed. Better to stick with what you know and not try to explain things we don't know, or just show off, for example. Thanks, Gopal. That was a nice reflection.
Something from Daityari Haridas.
Daityari Hari Krishna.
He says, Hari Bol Maharaj, I really liked the point that even if one is learned, One cannot speak properly without being blessed by the Lord.
Yes.
Even bearing this in mind, is it that by understanding these rules of grammar, we strengthen our intelligence and don't allow ourselves to become bewildered by opposing arguments from people who may try to twist things around to suit their own agenda?
Well, it depends. It depends on our duty. It depends on our, position in society. If one is a frontline preacher who is preaching to, for instance, in India, is speaking to scholars, then of course he must be expert, or otherwise he will be bewildered by the scholars, just like this Kashmiri will be, Keshwar was bewildered by Lord Chaitanya. But the essence of knowledge, can be spoken by anyone, by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. You don't need grammatical expertise to be a learned scholar. There's a number of verses that we've heard since we started the Caitanya-caritämrta, where it says that even a boy, a foolish boy, young boy, can explain the depth of Vedic wisdom by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. One has to learn the art of hearing. And hearing means to hear submissively. And the problem with the cultivation of grammatical knowledge, as we have seen in the history of our movement, because the first Sanskrit scholars we had, many of them either went away or made mistakes, and Prabhupada dismissed them. Only Gopi Pranadana Prabhu and Prajumna Pandit stayed and did not get carried away by a little knowledge. The tendency is in the Kali Yuga, when you get a little knowledge, then you get carried away by your little knowledge, and you think you know it all, and then you start making mistakes, just like the Kashmiri did with Lord Chaitanya. And Prabhupada pointed it out, and he was very upset with it, actually. But if anybody talks to Jayadvaita Maharaj philosophy, he better be prepared. And Jayadvaita Maharaj was so intelligent that he didn't even finish high school because he saw through the educational system right from the beginning of his life. So he was more intelligent, and therefore he stayed among all the English editors. They also came and went, including Hayagriva, and everything had to be corrected. And Jayadvaita Maharaj is the perfect example of someone who becomes very learned by the grace, of hearing and getting the mercy of a pure devotee.
Next is something from Bhakta Charlie.
Hari Bol Bhakta Charlie, Hari Krishna.
He says, Hare Krishna Maharaj. In the purport to verse 89, it said, all intelligence comes from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I remember when I was young, hearing the voice or intelligence of my mother and father in my mind, guiding me away from doing so-called wrong things, as if they were my higher intelligence, which reminds me of the process of hearing that we practice, dovetailing our intelligence with that of our spiritual authorities in Krishna. Was this inner voice Krishna, as it is said that Krishna is all intelligence?
Yes. Yes, because the knowledge that comes down through our mothers and fathers is coming down from time immemorial. It's actually, you could say it's sub-religious principles that help us be good persons and be situated in honesty and truthfulness and all these things that we learn from our parents. If we're lucky. Nowadays in Kali Yuga, even the parents don't give this kind of training, but this is the natural order of things. Now we're living in an unnatural order of things. As the Kali Yuga progresses, it will get more and more unnatural, But yes, the wisdom that comes down from our mothers is coming from the Vedas. There's different levels of knowledge in the Vedas. All knowledge is coming from the Vedas. But don't forget that forgetfulness also comes from Krishna. So when you forget something, that also comes from Krishna. Therefore, you're dependent upon Krishna in all circumstances. Therefore, the inconceivable. Therefore, we already heard it once in the purport, but Jiva Goswami says in his Sandarbhas that unless you can actually understand that Krishna is inconceivable and therefore can do anything, then you cannot actually understand him or the Vedic knowledge. That has to actually come first before you can actually understand. And therefore, there's the saying that not even a blade of grass moves without the will of the Supreme. Because Maya Dyakshana Prakriti Suyate Shacharacharam. The material nature is directed by Krishna. Mama Maya Duratyaya. This is Krishna's Maya, belongs to him. Therefore, Duratyaya, it's difficult or, depending on the context, impossible to overcome. Maya me tam tarantite. But if one surrenders unto Krishna, then easily he can cross beyond it. If you don't surrender to Krishna, you cannot cross beyond the material nature. Not possible. You may become a big person in the eyes of human society, but that doesn't mean you can perfect your life and go back to the spiritual world. You still have to die and take birth after birth after birth after birth and go through all of these Holocaust things we go through, like pandemics and world wars and climate change and all these things, social upheaval, breakdown of family. Hare Krishna.
Next is something from Rati Manjari.
Hare Krishna, Rati.
She says, Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my respectful obeisances. Nice to have you back. From tonight's reading...
Well, thanks. At least it was only a day. Before it was a month.
From tonight's reading, I liked how, in the pastime with Keshava Kashmiri, Lord Chaitanya did not like it when his students laughed at the scholar.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And were cheering on Nimai Pandit's victory. And he stopped them. I also like that he first pointed out...
Yes, because why? Because he didn't want to embarrass him. Lord Chaitanya was compassionate to him. He didn't want to embarrass him. He just wanted to correct him.
I also like that he first pointed out more and more faults in the poetry of the scholar, but afterwards he took on a very humble position and said that he wasn't even fit to be the scholar's disciple. The Lord is so refined. It's nice and endearing to hear how the Lord possesses such a wide variety of ways to deal with his wayward servants.
Yeah, he is the supreme humble. He's the supremely humble. He's supreme everything. Therefore, all contradiction is reconciled within the personality of the Lord and his activities.
And how he always has our highest interest in mind.
Yes. Absolutely.
Bhakta Charlie says thank you.
Hare Krishna, Bhakta Charlie. Yes, I mean, what a relief not to be hearing one day, even one day. It's unbearable now. This is a great blessing. Great blessing. To need to hear the Caitanya-caritämrta and Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam every day. Addicted. The addiction to these shastras is positive, whereas addiction to the material energy and intoxication and all these other things, sensual activities, just degrades one. But addiction to these scriptures elevates one to the topmost position. I meant to mention also in I don't remember who it was who mentioned how, it may be important for us to get the grammatical knowledge in order to combat and know how to deal with, other, combatants. But I was remembering after I spoke on that point, a little later on, I was remembering how Lord Chaitanya dealt with the Brahmin who was actually illiterate in South India when he was touring South India. And the Brahmin was illiterate, and he was reading Bhagavad Gita every day in the open, in the courtyard of the village, main courtyard, the plaza, whatever it is, square, whatever it is. And all the local people knew he was illiterate, and he couldn't even, pronounce the words properly. So they were always teasing him. "Oh, Pandit, what are you reading?" And Lord Chaitanya came there, and he watched for a while, and then he came up to the Pandit, and he said, "Pandit, what are you doing?" And he knew, he could understand that Lord Chaitanya was not teasing him, that he was real. So he said, "Well, my spiritual master gave me the order to read Bhagavad Gita, 18 chapters every day. So that's what I'm doing. I must fulfill the order of my spiritual master." And Lord Chaitanya said, "But I notice that sometimes you're crying. Why is that?" He says, "Well, when I see this picture in the front of the book of Krishna, driving the chariot of Arjuna, and I think of how the Lord serves his devotees, I become overwhelmed with that emotion and I cry." And Lord Chaitanya picked him up and embraced him and said, "You are the real knower of the Gita." So our acharyas also comment that even though he was illiterate, he attended classes. It's to the point that was being made in the purports about hearing, that you can become a learned scholar just by hearing, even if you're not expert in grammar. The main thing is to actually have understood the essence, grasp the concepts, and be able to explain them to others. Prabhupada once said, if you can grasp the concept properly, then you can translate that concept into any language, and it's not different. Haribol, Hare Krishna.
It's from Bhakta Patrick.
Hare Krishna, Bhakta Patrick.
He says, Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances.
Jai, glories to Srila Prabhupada.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I think it is wonderful to hear how Lord Chaitanya is so expertly and compassionately defeating the demonic qualities within the hearts of the souls, rather than physically defeating them.
Yes. That's Lord Chaitanya's mission. Nice realization. Hare Krishna. Thank you. Okay, we'll stop there with our readings for tonight. And tomorrow's Ekadasi. I don't know if it's there, Ekadasi, in every place, but it is tomorrow is Ekadashi, so I wish everybody a happy Ekadashi. Some extra chanting and hearing is in order. And we'll see you tomorrow evening in Ekadashi for more of the same. We'll start the last chapter of the Ädi-lilä of Caitanya-caritämrta. And before you know it, before long, we'll have the whole Caitanya-caritämrta recorded on the Facebook, and also because of Mayapur Shashi's expert seva, we'll have it over on the YouTube also, to be able to be referred to and learned, read, heard. Sri Caitanya-caritämrta ki jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol. See you tomorrow night, same time, same place, same station, on Ekadashi. See you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.